Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and the Uncommon Good provided by Mercy College of Health Sciences. Learn more at mchs.edu.
Welcome, folks, to the Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
And I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
We are coming to you live from these United States of America here in Des Moines, Iowa, where we both work for Mercy College of Health Sciences. I am the Senior Advisor for Mission Initiatives and the Director of the Center for Human Flourishing. Bud, tell everyone on the good old airwaves what you do.
I'm the Associate Provost down at the college.
Associate. He's the provosting. He provides for association.
Can I say Vice Provost on air? Or should I? Well...
Vice Provost, is that what it is?
I like Vice.
Vice, like Miami Vice?
Vice Regent.
Vice Regent.
Vice it got different meanings, but just the most powerful meaning.
Viceroy. Yeah, the best in purist, that's right. And Mercy College of Health Sciences, underwriting our show, mchs.edu. We're well into the fall semester, seeing people back on campus, Bud. It's sort of interesting to reflect on what it's been like the last year and people walking around. We actually have the recovery room, which is the new eatery, sort of, fast grab food, drink sort of place. Life is returning to campus, and it's just sort of it's refreshing to see that happening in the fall here.
Yeah, I was talking to the enrollment team yesterday, and they're working with marketing to prepare this. They're basically going to show folks, if you came here and studied with this program, here's where. Well, let me back up. It's like an emergency scenario, and at each part of the scenario, you see, like where different professionals jump in.
Oh,
so
yeah.
It looks pretty cool because, we're not just nursing. We've got the sonography, rad tech, radiation technology. Medical assisting's really taken off, so a lot going on down there.
It's funny because I think at this point in your life, Bud, you wake up saying all the different programs. Rad tech, sonography. So, mchs.edu, Mercy College of Health Sciences, thank you for underwriting our show. But like we're saying, fall, we usually throw a big nod towards fall, you and I. Yeah. Big football fans, it's always nice to see the Cubs falling out of playoff contention and the Cardinals maybe being back in it. I got some looks there. Okay, good. I'm just making sure people are listening to the show. The nice weather, getting the chance to tell John Leonetti jokes about pumpkin spice latte. It's really a wonderful time of the year.
Yeah, if Cubs fans who are listening want to call in and use the Zip Whip line to gauge what it's like to actually have a team in playoff contention, they're free to do so.
515-223-1150.
That happens like once a century for them. And they had a dynasty going, I hear.
Yeah. We heard about it a lot.
Yeah. They had that miraculous win against the Indians, and then after that, it's been subpar. But if we make it to the playoffs, I'll comfort John Leonetti with a pumpkin spice latte.
My favorite part about this is I was on the morning show with John Leonetti. He kept trying to jinx us. So he's like, first place Cardinals, right? And we're like, all right, John, thanks. We see what you're doing. Well, folks, we kind of jinxed something a little while ago. We were going to do a multiple-part series on Leviathan and the Bride of Christ, and where we did 3 episodes, and then we're like, look, we're going to do the 4th, wrap it all up. And then a lot of stuff has happened since then, so I think our last part 3 was early in August, but as we said, we're going to finish it up today. So Leviathan and the Bride of Christ, the idea about the sort of 2 worldviews that are foundational to how we proceed with understanding the political life and the political world. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We'll do a little bit of refresher when we get back from the break about what we mean by Leviathan, the sort of philosophical political theory of Thomas Hobbes, and then the Church's understanding of the Bride of Christ and what that does to set forth our understanding of the life together in the polis. But today we want to focus on the practicalities of, okay, you talk about the theory and the history of this. What does that look like on the ground for Christians as we live day-to-day life? And that's what we're going to be doing today here on the show. So we want to say thank you for joining the show. And then if you want to dial in or text in 515-223-1150, this is The Uncommon Good, and we'll be back right after this.
Since 1924, St. Vincent de Paul has been helping those less fortunate work towards self-sufficiency. Last year, St. Vincent de Paul helped over 20,000 individuals with food, clothing, and shelter, while also offering classes in financial literacy, high school completion, career readiness, and prisoner re-entry. svdpdsm.org, 515-282-8327. Shop, donate, volunteer, serve. This message was brought to you by Homemakers Furniture.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio is provided by Dental Associates, addressing your smile needs and dreams. 515-225-6742. Des Moines-DentalAssociates.com. Thank you, Dental Associates, for your support of Iowa Catholic Radio.
Thank you, Big Red Q Quick Print, for underwriting the sports report. Family owned and operated since 1980, Big Red Q Quick Print is a full-service print shop, ready to help you with all your printing needs with speed and accuracy. BigRedQ-DesMoines.com.
Thank you, Golden Rule Plumbing, Heating, and Cooling, for sponsoring my show. John Leonetti in the morning on Iowa Catholic Radio. Golden Rule, servicing Des Moines for over 15 years. They obey the rules to live by, especially the Golden Rule. Online at goldenrulephc.com.
Thank you, Ashworth Vision Clinic, for underwriting Dowling Catholic Sports 365 on Iowa Catholic Radio. Ashworth Vision Clinic online at ashworthvision.com. Ashworth Vision Clinic, 515-440-4610.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio is provided by Blessman International. Blessman International partners with volunteers to provide sustainable programs for children in South Africa by leading 12-day all-exclusive experiences, sharing the heart of Christ with vulnerable children in South Africa. Teams are forming to do something significant in an African child's life. Learn more at blessmaninternational.org. That's blessmaninternational.org. Thank you, Blessman International, for your support of Iowa Catholic Radio.
We're back with the Uncommon Good. Bob Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this Wednesday. Thank you for being a part of our show on Iowa Catholic Radio Network, where you can always listen live on iowacatholicradio.com. Donate there. You can also check us out on Facebook. Just go to Iowa Catholic Radio and friend us on Facebook. You can follow Iowa Catholic Radio at IA Catholic Radio on Twitter. And then also, if you download the Iowa Catholic Radio app, you can listen live and do other functions as well wherever you have data. So, Bud, we wanted to close out today one of the series that we've been doing. We've had 3 parts so far. This is the 4th and final part on Leviathan and the Bride of Christ. Just to catch people up real quick, in case you weren't able to listen to those or you don't remember, Thomas Hobbes, a political philosopher, and I always mess this up, the 16th and 17th century, right? Like right around the cusp there. Wrote a book called Leviathan. He is alluding to the great beast in Job, and I think actually in the Psalms as well. This idea that there's a being who's so powerful that nothing can stand against its power on earth. And Thomas Hobbes uses Leviathan as a metaphor to talk about the state. So his idea is that human life is brutish, short, a war of all against all, and that the only way that you can sort of rest and wrestle peace from this world is through a violence that creates, so to speak, borders, keeps violence on the outside and peace on the inside. But if you'll notice, the idea is that peace is not foundational. Violence and strife is foundational for Thomas Hobbes. And so that we enter into the social contract, and of course that has a lot of ways in which that's developed. But for Hobbes, it's an implicit contract, so you don't have to be aware of it. But you're born into a world where you sort of sign over your rights, or at least some of them, to the state, so that the state can enforce through power this situation of peace, which again is not an original peace. It's sort of won through violence, and that's how society has to operate. The church, of course, being the bride of Christ, thinks that peace is primary. God created the world in peace and due order, the tranquility of peace. It's only with sin that we have fallen away from that original peace. And the political order is in some ways being cognizant of sin, so we're not sort of idealist and silly enough to act like if we let go of all restraints, people would necessarily act well and good and loving to the neighbor. This is what St. Augustine meant by the city of God versus the city of man. But certainly the idea is that our life together is primary, and as much as we can have a life together, we imitate the life of the Trinity in its communications of persons, and so that's what we strive for. But I got to say, I think that 2 cities is a good way to think about it. The Christian polis as the bride of Christ trying to live the city of God on earth among humans, and then Thomas Hobbes, who thinks that all you have is the peace that you wrestle through hard-won strife in order to have a little bit of peace?
Well, Augustine's idea of the two cities is a really helpful reference point in this discussion, because Augustine makes the point that these two cities don't exist in different spheres. So there's so to speak, like one stage of the world, and the two cities exist kind of in that space together. Now, in listening to those previous episodes, I could see how folks might feel a little pessimistic about things, because one point we highlighted was that regardless of what you think about Hobbes and his successors, like guys like John Locke, like you might say, well, that sounds bunk. We pointed out it's the way like a lot of people think, and it's so much a part of the world around us that we sort of take it for granted. In the face of those circumstances, like one temptation is always to say like, well, the world's gotten so corrupt, and we know that our final end is with God in the beatific vision, and therefore we, like, it's sort of like the ejection plan or the bunker down and wait till Jesus returns plan. You see this already in the New Testament. Like St. Paul at one point has to write a church and say, like, I hear some of you have stopped working.
Right.
And, like people just were like, well, Jesus is coming back, so I can quit my job and, and play video games all day. And that's like starting with the New Testament, but then throughout Christian history, that's never been seen as the faithful answer. So we have patron saints who are saints of so many different vocations. I think that's a good way to think about this when we get into the practicality of the matter. So you take something like education, and there's a way where if you apply kind of a Hobbesian, Lockean lens to education, the goal of education is really like getting our kids into the best schools so that they can find the right career, and by right career, make the most money. And that's sort of like the end is being successful in material terms in the society in which we live. As Catholics, hopefully, we approach this in a completely different manner, where education in and of itself is not just functional, like there's a sort of like practical result in terms of the bottom line, but we approach human beings as holistic persons, where their their dignity, you better take over, I'm kind of, their dignity is not rooted simply in their financial well-being or their industriousness, but it's related to the fact that they're body-soul composites destined for eternal beatitude.
Yeah, and it's not to say that in the social contract, Thomas Hobbes' sort of idea of things, that there can't be. I mean, they think that there's things like sacrifice, and that like there's sort of people who have made huge sacrifices for the sake of the community. In many ways, that's exactly what things like the military, the police force do, or things like this. But the sacrifice is in many ways to create that border between chaos and order, and in some ways it is sort of a sacrificial order, that like there has to be a certain amount of sacrifices to create this border so that people or situations outside of them can't creep in. And so that starts to be one of the practical questions that comes up. On one hand, it's like you said, if you can find a more, and you in Hobbes' order, you want to make as many gates as possible. I don't know a better way to say this. And so, you go send your kids off to school because they live in a country that has a border and a Leviathan, right? And then they live in a community that does. But even in that, right, then you have a house. But then you have like sort of yourself, right? And it's just a matter of like, can you make more and more space that the disorder and brutishness of the world stays on the outside? But then you have things like natural disasters, pandemics, hurricanes, and the sort of Hobbesian model has this big question, right? Which is to say, when things all go bad, what are you going to do by yourself? Can you make gates sufficient to save yourself from all eventualities? And the answer, of course, is no, everyone dies. But you start to see that this is a sort of cancerous way to understand the social fabric. As more and more things press against this Hobbesian model, people become more and more fractious. And so, sure, maybe you have the resources for a while longer to hide behind another gate, as it were. But eventually, something comes for everyone. Even the Roman Empire fell, right? The Vandals eventually burned the place down. And then where did all of that gatekeeping get you? And so the city of God and the city of man and the love that they have asks us very practically, why do we think we have civic and political life together? Why do we have a communion? And if the idea is like, well, you have to do that so that you can join together, so you can keep the world and its brutishness at bay, so many things in life are eventually going to press that narrative where it's no longer true. But if the idea is, come what may, we are together, we're a unity. I mean, but I think that's why when you see stuff like people going like, oh, when there was that hurricane, in Arcadia, the Cajun Navy came out and people sort of like of their own bounded by, together and tried to help. And, that's difficult to explain with Hobbes, much easier to explain with the Bride of Christ model, I think.
Yeah, and this gets at the heart of something that Hobbes really pressed, where he said the state shouldn't really answer questions of good and bad, that its goal is simply to protect. I mean, we use the word order, but I'm using order in the sense that Hobbes did, not someone like St. Augustine. And so he says, like, I'm just going to provide this sort of like, what's a better term? I keep thinking peace, but
I think you're right. Like the fact that they sort of used a word and sort of flipped it on its head is illustrative. That's what they would call peace.
Just policing folks, so to speak. And I think John Locke, who followed Hobbes, he realized the limitations of that because he could see some real criticisms of that idea. So he says, like, what guides this whole process? And he says self-interestedness. Like, if we all act in a self-interested manner, it's sort of like the invisible hand of the market. People, by looking out for themselves, there's this idea that it kind of builds up a better whole. But like you say, we start to see that really tear apart in different contexts. And really, even in our society where there's not like a strong conception of the common good today, we recognize the beauty of real sacrifice. So someone who, say, gives their life protecting the innocent, like we're all sort of moved by a soldier who would head into Normandy Beach on D-Day or whatnot. And so life can't be reduced to that. It especially ties into like medicine. And we want to sort of like make medical decisions by punting on the question of the good. And then we have one of our own loved ones, in a vulnerable place. And of course it's revolting, the idea, like, if a medical team enters the room and sees them just as, well, what's the value of this person if they can't do X or Y?
And I think that's exactly right. Is it's hard to avoid the value judgment taking a sharp edge when it comes to these evaluations of social spaces and the sort of Hobbesian, Lockean social contract sort of ideas. We're going to have to stop there for right now. When we get back, we'll finish up this discussion. Hopefully a few more practical pointers about what that looks like. This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this Wednesday for The Uncommon Good. Thank you for listening to the show, and we'll be back right after this.
This is a Young Catholic Minute. Why do I have to vote in a certain way? Hey neighbor, what happened here? Oh, that candidate stopped by, stole my stuff, burned my house to the ground, kidnapped my children, and poisoned my water supply. That's horrible. Yeah, but his economic policy's great. As Catholics, we realize that some issues are just more important than others. So even if a candidate is great in one area, if they have even one of the really important issues wrong, there's no way we can vote for them. I mean, even if Hitler were really pro-environment, the fact that his legislation killed millions of people means he's not a good candidate. In the same way, someone who supports the killing of unborn children, euthanasia, or homosexual marriage is someone who doesn't understand the true dignity of the human person. And we can't vote for them, no matter how many jobs they'll create or whales they'll save. For more Young Catholic Minutes, go to youtube.com/youngcatholic.
Iowa Catholic Radio is supported by our listeners and business underwriters. Join us today in welcoming a new underwriter, Tuffy Tire and Auto Service in Ankeny, offering complete car care service from routine maintenance to complete diagnostics and full-service auto repair. TuffyAnkeny.com.
The Diocese of Des Moines is now offering the option of receiving the Catholic Mirror digitally. If you would like to receive your copy of the Catholic Mirror in a digital format via email, instead of your regular copy that comes in your mailbox, visit dmdiocese.org/Catholic-mirror. That's dmdiocese.org/Catholic-mirror. You'll see the digital version heading at the top and a hyperlink on Sign Up Here. Visit dmdiocese.org/Catholic-mirror. That's dmdiocese.org/Catholic-mirror.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio provided by Northwest Bank. Commitment you can bank on. Northwest Bank is a community bank serving Iowa and Nebraska. NW.BANK. Thank you, Northwest Bank, for supporting Iowa Catholic Radio.
Back to the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this Wednesday. Thank you for listening to the show. Thank you for listening to this entire series that we've had on Leviathan and the Bride of Christ, and part 4 trying to end it with a few practical measures. I mean, Bud, I think one of the practical ones is to say, well, what do we do about politics then? And certainly it's a byword now about how fractious politics have gotten. And so we're not going to be able to say that if you follow Bride of Christ, you do A sort of politics, and if you follow Leviathan, you do B. But I think that there's something really important about how we interpret the landscape. When politics becomes something about parties winning and things like this, we understand deep down that there's sort of a fractiousness about this. But I know people on both sides of the aisle who go, the problem is only our opponents play to win. We don't. And it devolves into these big arguments. The question that I'm not trying to say is like, give peace a chance, bro, or, if only we all loved each other. But I do think there's a fundamental philosophical reason that we end up doing that, which is to say, if we think that peace can only be hashed out by establishing, like we said, these borders in which peace inside occurs and outside it can't, it's going to reflect in politics is the way that we sort of do it. It really does have to be about either victim blaming, claiming a sort of victimhood, all of these things that you start to hear people complain about in our politics. But what it gets down to is to say, for you out there, the listener, you don't have to be part of any of the fractious whatever. If we have political parties, that's sort of like just how the cookie crumbles, right? That's the sort of name of the game as it exists. But you don't have to think about politics being zero-sum in that way. The question is, how do we realize and be honest in practical matters that what we have to choose is a reality where we're all in this together instead of sides trying to win out or trying to ensure a worldview where we think that there is only, not only just finite resources, but sort of diminishing returns if anyone else participates in them over against us.
When you were talking there, I thought about a bumper sticker that I saw recently where it was on the back of a car said, "He who dies with the most toys wins." And obviously it was sort of tongue-in-cheek. I mean, I'm sure the person driving doesn't really believe that at the end of the day, but it captures in kind of a flippant manner the sort of Hobbesian Lockean worldview that we've talked about. Like, life is just a matter of compiling the most resources and protecting them until you die. I think as Catholics, like, we all recognize the shortcomings of that idea, but the difficult part of this conversation, we would always bring this up in class as well, is you can't get around the question of suffering. It's a part of human existence, and so much of philosophy throughout history has been sort of like, how do we make sense of this, and how do we deal with it? And I think the Hobbesian worldview promises ultimately this false utopia where you could completely push to the boundaries suffering. And as followers of Jesus, we not only recognize that suffering is a part of human existence, but it's also something that's not to be avoided at all costs. Our Lord says, unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it cannot produce new life. And he says that we meet him in the least of these when we clothe the naked and when we give water to those who are thirsty. We actually have an encounter with our Lord. And that gets to the very question of the meaning of human existence. We tell this to our students, you can't know what love looks like. You can't know the ultimate telos of your existence by bypassing suffering. It's not reveling in it. It's not inviting it, but it's recognizing that really we're most humane when we are in solidarity with those who are on the margins, who are vulnerable, who are, practically speaking, suffering. And that's a way that we come to know and actually identify with who God is. So as Catholics, that transforms how we think about education, politics. I mean, medicine, like financially, it doesn't make sense to take care of someone who doesn't have health insurance. But we've always felt like we're called to do so.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the two things to hold together is, on one hand, suffering is unavoidable, but of course, like, as we're able, we try to relieve it as much as we can. But that includes, meaning very much so, when we discuss this, holding the idea right, that isn't my excuse to let someone else suffer. And if I have the resources to share someone's burden, and I think that's in the end, Bud, is, you know, Hobbes doesn't think we're going anywhere, right? There's no place that this is heading. There's, can we make it work for now? And when you're dead, largely, like, you're dead, like, your problem solved. The world, life is no longer brutal because you don't have it. But if we believe as the bride of Christ that our life together is heading somewhere, all of a sudden the idea of shouldering burdens together stops being meaningless or just a mere job, but it becomes the very thing we're doing together. And I think humans at the root understand this, that carrying burdens together is essentially what makes us different. This is the Uncommon Good. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, our family, our city, our state, our nation, the entire world. This is the Uncommon Good. We'll be back next week. But in the meantime, what can people do to join us with our prayer life here on Iowa Catholic Radio?
Please pray the Rosary daily with us at 5:30 a.m. or 9:30 a.m. That Rosary opportunity is available anytime on the Iowa Catholic Radio app. We pray the Angelus on air at 5:55 a.m. and right before noon, and then the Divine Mercy Chaplet 5 minutes before 3. Local shows and times are also available on demand, both on the app that I mentioned, but also iowacatholicradio.com.
And, of course, the Iowa Catholic Radio Fall Carathon starts September 20th, so that's next week. Please consider a gift of $30 a month to continue our mission of connecting listeners to Christ. You can give now at iowacatholicradio.com, call 515-223-1150, or even text in. Thank you for supporting Iowa Catholic Radio. And just so you know, down the line, Saturday, October 30th, the Women's Conference at Embassy Suites downtown Des Moines with Kathleen Beckman, Barbara Heil, and Tim Jameson. Spiritual warfare in today's world. Doors open at 7, Rosary 7:30 a.m., Mass at 8, and the conference starts in earnest at 9 a.m. and ends at 5 o'clock. So I hope you're able to join us as we're out and about, not only on the radio waves, but in the Diocese of Des Moines as well. Well, Bud, glad that we could put a bow on this one. It's been a very fruitful discussion and helps me to think through those things. So now hopefully we can go follow our own advice. We'll see if we can pull that off.
Well, the Carathon starts on my wife Rachel's birthday, so if you want to make a donation in her honor, it's better than doing one in mine.
Absolutely. This is the Uncommon Good, and we'll be back next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one, and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and The Uncommon Good provided by Mercy College of Health Sciences. Learn more at mchs.edu.